Carthage must be destroyed. Today, on this YouTube channel, we are going to be continuing our series on the Hail Caesar walkthrough. It's been a long time since we filmed, but since the coronavirus is here and we're all trapped inside, I figured why not film it. So let's continue the series. So I've got my two forces here lined up, ready to explain to you the first part of how melee and close combat will work. So you can see up here, I've got some Romans set up. I've got just a bunch of Hastati, Pricape, and Triarii, some Velites. Don't mind the way I pronounce everything. I don't know, I'm not a Latin speaker. And on the other side here, we've got a Carthaginian force. This is basically, by the way, how two divisions might look in Hail Caesar, where you've got about 4 or 5 units per side, per division. I've got some Celtic light cavalry, some light, we'll call them Italian allies. Maybe they're Samnites, Umbrians. I don't know who fought for Hannibal. Let's just say they're Italian allies. A standard unit of medium Italian allies, an elephant, and a really mad, Cisalpine Celtic leader. Anyway, I'm going to get right into this. You'll notice, though, that from my last walkthrough, I skipped through the last part of the shooting phase. I want to have better model representation. I still don't have any archers or artillery. I've been focusing on melee all this time. So I am just going to jump right into the melee and go from there. Here from the bird's eye, I've moved all of the forces up to meet each other. We've got the Italians now fighting some Romans, duking it out, and there's some Romans fighting the elephant there. Now, this all here is what Hail Caesar might look like once you start rolling along and you start charging each other. Now, these guys are close up fighting. This is what we call an engagement here. There's actually a couple of engagements going on here. And before I get into how to charge and how to look at how they move through charging and all that kind of stuff and the actual fighting bit, we need to establish some things here that are mentioned in the Hail Caesar rulebook. The first thing to do is to recognize what an engagement is. An engagement is basically two types of things. It's either where we have down here, we've got a standard unit of Italian allies that are fighting 2 Hastati units at once. When a unit center front is touching an enemy, or the enemy's unit center front is touching yours, that means that they're in an engagement here. So these 2 units here, where the center fronts are touching, these are called fighting units. Fighting units are exactly that. They're fighting. They're in the middle of combat. In this scenario here, we've got 4 fighting units. We've got the 2 Hastati here. We've got the Triarii. We've got the Italian allies and the elephant. These units here are all in an engagement, and they're all the fighting units. Now, there's 2 more units here you can obviously see that are also in an engagement here. We've got these Principe behind them, and then we've got these light skirmishers in the back here. They're touching the backs of these units, so they're in support of these fighting units. This is what we call, just like I said, supporting units. Supporting units, when they're in this, when they're up there supporting the fighting units, they're also part of an engagement. So we've actually got 2 engagements here. We've got where these guys are fighting these 2 units. These 2 are supporting it, so that's 1 engagement there. So all of their fight results and stuff will affect the end break test. We'll talk about that later. That's 1 engagement. And here's a second engagement where you got Triarii and an elephant. So there's 2 fights going on here, basically. There's 2 engagements. And just to clarify, if you haven't watched the last video, it's been so long I don't remember if I went through it, but the center front is the center of the unit. Usually people like to put like a leader or some sort of model to represent the center. I just draw from the actual center line between the bases, but that's the center front. These 2 fellows have their center fronts touching this unit. That becomes 1 single engagement. Okay, and there's some things we need to know when we have guys that are in an engagement. Whether they're a fighting unit, like these 2, or these 3 here rather, and or the supporting units like the units on either side in the back on both sides here. Once they're in an engagement, let's say that these Velites have come up and they haven't quite charged into support, nothing can be shot at when something's in an engagement. So if you guys are in an engagement, they can't be shot at. Once they're in a support role or a fighting role, then they cannot be targeted by ranged attacks. They also cannot make ranged attacks themselves. They're too busy fighting or too busy supporting, so nothing with a bow or an arrow or sling or whatever have you. Once they're in fighting or supporting, then they cannot make any shooting attacks. They also cannot take any commands. So in Hail Caesar, once you guys are stuck up in fighting up close and personal, they're done there until the fight's over, until it's resolved or something gives. There's some exceptions to that rule with special rules, but I won't go over those right now. And finally, they cannot basically move. So yeah, they can't move once they're stuck in there. The only way they'll be moving is results of break tests, which we'll go over later. So yeah, they can't shoot, they can't be shot at, they can't move, and they cannot take commands. That's what happens when your guys are in an engagement, whether they're supporting or fighting. They're just too busy to be doing anything else. Okay, so we have broken off the engagement. Carthage and Rome, they don't want to be together anymore, so we are going to go on to charge moves here, actually getting into the combat. Now, a charge move is just movement, but it's the actual move that gets your guy right into melee. So, to actually get your guys into combat, you have to order them into combat. You can't just move guys in there, and we talked about that before in the command part of the walkthrough. You have to phrase your order to charge, and you should be specific, and I'll show you why in a bit. But basically, if I wanted these Romans, let's say it's the Romans' turn, and I have a successful command roll, well, first I have to give the order, and then do the command roll. Say I order these Hastati to charge these Italian allies here, and they could move 6 inches because infantry movement is 6 inches. So what they would do is they'd have to measure to see if they can make it. So if they had a successful charge, they have to make 10.5 inches. Infantry movement is 6. And based on that, they would have to move twice, requiring 2 moves. And that would be a successful a charge. Now, when you're actually doing a charge, the charge itself is the final move in movement. Because remember, in this game, you can get you can move up to 3 times depending on how well your command roll is. For infantry, that's a potential of moving 18 inches. So let's say he's got a successful command, he would move. He's also, remember, proximity here before I get into that. Once you get into proximity, he's only going straight or backwards. Within 12 inches is the proximity rule that comes into play. You can watch the other videos about that. And okay, so the first move here, I'll just do it move by move. Some people might move straight in because it's a fairly simple charge, but the first 6 inches here is not the charge move. The order has been to charge, but he has 2 moves to fulfill that charge move, right? So he moves his 6 inches. The last move here is called the charge move, and then that's when he'd move in to connect. It's important to know and to establish that the last move is the charge move, because there's various reactions and things that can happen, or certain measurements or distances we can take into account when we're measuring the charge. So to show you again, just real quick, say, okay, charge the Italians, and he rolls a command roll of 2, he'd move up 6, and then he'd say, okay, he can still move up there. So yeah, when you are charging, make sure you say really loud and clear and be very specific. Intend on your target. Make sure you not let yourself and the opponent know who you're charging. Don't just move your guys, that's not right. Even in the initiative phase, you must tell your opponent who's charging what, okay? So make sure the intention is known. Remember too, if you're rolling to charge, your charge may be affected by blunders. So if you're not using the initiative to charge and you're rolling for it, watch the blunders. Your charge might be totally screwed up. You might charge more than you wanted to. There's a whole bunch of things that could happen. Another thing too, the rulebook brings up, you don't have to be within movement range to say you want to charge someone, okay? Like if you were 24 inches away from a foe, and the maximum you can move on an infantry ever is 18 based on the rolls, you could still state, charge the enemy in front of me. And the unit's still going to try and make it. Even though he's not going to make it, that's the order. So he's going to try and do that. When you do state the charge move, you always have to do it in the most straight and forward manner possible. And it doesn't matter if, and that's for any order really, it doesn't matter if, you're not in proximity or you are in proximity. When you're in proximity within 12 inches, you're only going straight or backwards. But if we're not in proximity, let's say he's way back there and he's 24 inches away, you say charge, he's still going to go a straight line. He's not going to go left. He's not going to veer right. He's going to follow the move straight through. And that's for any charge, okay? Okay, this elephant and this Triarii unit are now fighting again. So who can charge and who can't? Well, when you are in an engagement, you cannot charge, obviously. If you're supporting, if you're fighting, you're stuck in there. You're not moving, you're not charging, you're not taking orders. So units that are in engagement cannot charge. Let's go and bring in some of these cavalrymen here that are open order. Okay, they're in open order here. Oops. And I won't put them all in. I'll move the ruler. Don't need you anymore. So let's put these cavalry here. These cavalry, they want to charge the back end of these Triarii here and do a rear attack. But they are in open order. An open order unit here cannot charge a formed unit. Doesn't matter if they're engaged or not. Simply an open order unit cannot charge a formed unit. What this unit here would have to do is they'd have to have orders in order to form back up into a formed unit, which might look something like this. But they may form up like that, and then that would be a single command there, and then they'd have to do a charge, which would be the final move. They'd need at least two movements with their command to actually successfully charge in there. So yeah, if your guys are in open order, they cannot charge other formed units. They can, however, charge, let's say it was like this. Let's say these Velites decide to come in. Open order units can charge other open order units. But as you'll see later, it may not be wise for these Velites to charge a cavalry. Infantry charging cavalry is not really a good idea, and we'll look at why later you might not want to. Maybe you're crazy like me and still do it. Engaged units can't charge. Open order units can only charge other open order units. We should mention too that open order units can charge an elephant. They can charge artillery pieces, and they can charge baggage. They can charge baggage, like a baggage train or something if you play with that. Basically anything that's kind of a single model, like the elephant or other skirmishers or an artillery piece, can be charged in open order. It's just the formed units you can't charge with open order. The other things that can't charge are disordered units. Obviously they're disordered, they can't take orders. The other thing they can't charge are shaken units. They're too broken up, their morale is too low. They're about to die and flee. They're not going to be doing any charges. And the other thing that can't charge are columns and squares. Okay, here we see the Romans. They're now in a column formation. If you are in a column, you're not charging either. In order to actually charge something, you would have to give them an order to, let's say they're a standard unit and not small units here. You'd have to give them an order to reform and charge if you wanted to charge. So reforming into a standard battle line would be an entire movement, and then you'd have to do a charge after or move into after. So you need at least 2 moves to charge with a column. Just like open order, you have to reform into a formed unit, and then you'd be able to charge. I don't know how to make a square with 40 by 40 millimeter lads, so I just, what I mean by that is they're based on 40 by 40 millimeter bases. I just set them up like this. When units are in a square, they cannot charge at all. Squares are a little more complex according to the rules, so if you're in a square, you're not going to do any charging that turn. You're going to have to first form back up. You'd use the order to form back up into your standard unit, your standard battle line formation, and that's all you do. You couldn't do any more movement, you couldn't charge. So squares are a bit more defensive and take more time to get back into formation. Whereas like open order guys like these, or these guys who were previously in a column, they could use an entire command move to reform, and then they could potentially charge up to, or either they could potentially have up to 2 more movements to do a charge. And artillery can never charge in any circumstance. So scorpions and stuff that can move, like light artillery, they're usually just a support role when they do get into melee. They don't actually, and are not allowed to charge. Here to show it, and I'm just going to start cleaning this up a bit, but open order units can also charge buildings. We should put that in there. So if you got guys camping out in the building, your open order units like these Velites over here, these Velites, they are allowed to charge directly into a building and fight the enemy. Of course, the enemy probably has some defense. I shouldn't say they charge directly into it. They have to fight the enemy. We'll go over that later. I've never actually used buildings in the game. Here I go rambling off and I got nothing to film except this blank space here. But yeah, open order units like these lads here can charge buildings without taking a formation. Cavalry, we got some cavalry over here. Cavalry and chariots, that kind of stuff. They cannot charge directly home on the front of a pike phalanx. So if you're fighting pikemen, cavalry cannot charge their front. You'd have to get to their flank or their rear. You can, however, charge pikemen if they're disordered or shaken. So that's the exception there for cavalry. They cannot charge pikemen if the pikemen are all in good order and it's their front. Okay, let's talk about actually making the charge move. Now, center front in this game, which we've established is the center of the unit, the front model in the center there, is very important in this game. Right now we've got this Hastati unit, which is locked into proximity here. They're both within 12 inches, both going to have to oblige to the proximity rule. However, you'll notice here that this dude's center front here, this unit's center front here is this way. In order to do the final move, the charge, your center front has to be facing the thing you're charging. It doesn't matter if it's open ordered or if it's a formed unit, whatever it is. If you want this unit to charge these lads here, you're going to be ordering them to move in a way that puts their center front directly there. Now, when you are in proximity here, he is obliged to face them anyway. So it's probably a good idea, especially if you're a bigger unit than a small unit, to get in there before smaller units come in and gang up on you. I'll show you that in a bit. But you would need 2 orders here to charge this. You couldn't go off initiative because these guys have to basically reposition themselves into where the center front is facing that unit, and then they'd be able to charge. So if I got 2 moves on a command roll, and they would need a command roll because initiative wouldn't be enough, they could have potentially, okay, your first move would be to turn, like something like that, and then they'd be able to use their last move to charge, the center fronts connect, now they're a fighting unit. And remember, the charge move, the last move on a charge, is going to be your final move. The charge move itself, you must be facing the opponent. You must be facing the foe. I'll show you another example here. This example here, the Hastati, let's say it's the Hastati's turn over there, and they want to charge this unit, but you see their center front is obscured by this tree. This tree's in their way, so they can't directly charge. You could order something like, what would I say? Run around the tree and charge the enemy's front. So in order to do that, the first thing you'd have to do is position yourself into a charging position to do the final charge move. Now remember, with the proximity rule, these guys actually aren't in proximity because their front is blocked by an object. So there's no proximity going on here, but you still probably want to charge if that's your goal. I don't know if you, or maybe you want to stay there. I don't know what you want to do. But if you wanted to charge, you'd have to give them an order. So let's say they move something like this. In any case, you can determine how they want to move and how they I don't want to move that tree, how they move, but basically they'd have to have an order to come around the tree, and then when they see this unit, the last 6 inches there, the last move would be the charge move into there. So you don't potentially have to see the foe to charge them. You could be around a corner, you could be behind a tree, as long as that last charge move connects and the last charge move has the center front see the thing they're charging, then it's legal. Actually do the charge move. Don't worry if some of your models in the unit move farther than the 6 inches allowed. They don't really care on the charge. So if these guys were here and they had to move 6 inches to meet this one, but 6 inches is only from the front, don't worry if these back guys moved 7 inches. That's not the point. The point is that the 6 inches from the center front was able to connect. These guys move an extra inch because they're a bigger unit or they're wider or something, whatever, as long as they make it into the actual combat. I've gone off and combined this into one big unit here instead of small units, just for simplicity's sake. Most charges in your game, if you're using a standard size or one size and you're fighting each other for frontages, they're basically going to look something like this. It might be a little far for a charge move, but it's going to be very simple. You're going to just have the center fronts run up to each other, meet, and then they're going to start fighting in the combat round. Units that are a similar size charge each other, they're going to try to maximize. So if this unit here was just off to the sides here. Even though the center front here logically would look like it goes up there and sticks there, the rules state as long as there's nothing like obstructing you and you can make it, you just try and get most of the men possible into combat. So in this situation, charging forward, you charge, and then you can maximize as long as the unit is a standard unit matching another standard unit. There's a little bit of an exception for smaller units, which we'll take a look here in a moment. But that's a basic charge move when the center front meets the foe as so. Alright, and what about a small unit charging a unit that's bigger than their own unit? Well, I actually have a video where I do 2-on-1 charges and small units, where because I play Republican Romans and I play a lot of small heavy units. But basically it follows the same thing, where you put your center front and you line it up to a foe, you're going to charge and you're going to meet them. For smaller units, or rather units that are small, charging a unit that is bigger than them, they really have to watch their positioning, okay? Because if you're over here and you charge like so, in the last example, I had the standard move maximize because you want to get most of your lads into combat. Well, when I've charged from here, my lads are already in combat. They're already maximized in that position. So some people do this, and this is wrong. They charge like this and they put their small unit to the center. That's not right, okay? Because once you get in there, your unit is already maximized. You don't shift over on smaller units. So if you've got the smaller unit, it's really important to put it in the right spot, because if he charges here, he's going to meet there. Why is that important? Because small units can potentially gang up on bigger units. So you want to be over on the left, because you might have some smaller units, some smaller buddies I should say. You got two units like this here, they both charge. This guy could charge here, and there's still room for another unit to fly in and charge there. You got 2 versus 1 here. So remember that, depending, if a unit has a smaller frontage than an enemy, it's really important where they fit, because you might be able to fit another unit into fighting that unit's front, which is very advantage. It would be a big advantage for you, really. Whereas like here, if I charge straight away, I come and hit, these guys can't fit in, they can't maximize over, so the best these guys could do is support this unit, which isn't as effective as actually sticking it right into them directly, right? Alright, we've got these Italian allies which are horribly surrounded. They're basically dead. I don't know if they could survive this unless the dice gods are on their side. But we have here an Italian unit in the center. On the left and right flank, the rear and the front, we've got a bunch of Romans surrounding them, ready to destroy them. We're going to talk about the charges to flank and rears. So in this situation, it would be very straightforward. This unit would want to charge the flank there, that to the front, that to the rear, and that to the other flank. And it's very obvious how they would charge. When you do make a charge here, you want to go straight forward, center, front, and for the flanks, you'd connect like so. So he's got his unit there now, say he charged. This guy in the back charges in. This guy here, remember when the center front touches, they're in engagement. So if these guys all charge like so, now they're all fighting that one unit. They're all engaged with that one unit. That unit's gonna die, I'm sorry. There's no way it's gonna survive a bunch of Stani with Pila coming in, or what Romans coming in with Pila rather. But that would be a very basic way to set up a, not set up, this is actually very idealistic. It's not a true situation, I think. It's very unlikely that you can totally engulf an enemy like this. But that's just the flank, rear, and front. Let's say they don't have so many units, not so many buddies helping them out. And there's only these 2 units on the, let's put this guy in the back here. Let's say this left flank has a foe coming in, and then this flank here has this front here has the foe coming in. When you are determining what area to charge, you have to take note of the quadrants. What are the quadrants? I shouldn't say quadrants, let's say quarters, okay? Let's say quarters. This is a unit, and this unit has different quarters. There's a quarter in the front, on the left, the right, and the back. The rule book doesn't state the degree on what it is, so I think use common sense. I think go from the corner and draw lines out like that on each area, but that's their quarter there. When you're giving an order to a unit to charge, before the order is given, you have to take a look at where your guy is sitting. So if your guy is sitting here, once you give them an order to charge that, they are only allowed to charge the quarter they're sitting in, okay? This guy couldn't be charging the flank. He couldn't be charging the rear because he's in the front quarter of this unit. So if you give this guy an order to charge, he's only charging that unit. These guys are the unit's front rather. These guys here are in the flank quarter of this unit, so they're only charging the flank, okay? Now this is important to establish because when you're close up like this, it's very obvious. Like, why would you want to go around that? You can't anyway because of proximity. Why would you want to go around and charge the rear? Or these guys here making a super move to go into the flank doesn't make sense with the proximity rule. But it's important to establish this because if you have something that's not obviously in range, like say you have a formed light cavalry unit that can move quite far, they might be way off over here. And if they're not in proximity, they could still sneak around and move into another quarter. If you're far away with cavalry, and I'm not going to set it up, but I'll just explain it. If you're way over here, not in proximity yet, you still have to, before the order received, when the order is received, you have to look at where their quarter is. So if you're on the flank of this enemy, and they're way out of here, out of proximity, they're still going to have to only be allowed to charge this flank. They couldn't move to the other enemy's flank and charge the rear. So it's very important to see where your unit's position is before you charge. Depending on your target, that target's quarter will determine the flank, the front, or the rear they can actually charge. Yeah, the most important thing is to determine where the charger is before it starts moving. That's where you're going to charge. So if he's back here, if he's at the front here, again, let's put this here for an example. If he's here and his center front is towards this area here, he's only allowed to charge the front. In order to charge the flank, if he wanted to, he would have to reposition himself and then he'd be allowed to charge the next turn, which you might be able to because this unit might come crashing in, hold him up, and he can reposition himself and charge. However, he'd have to do a bit of backwards maneuvering because he's within 12 inches here. He can only go forward or backwards because of proximity. It's a bit easier to do this kind of move with cavalry because they got a bit more movement. Sometimes you're going to run into a situation where you don't know what quarter you're in. In this kind of scenario where you could potentially be, okay, am I in the flank quarter or am I in the front quarter? In this scenario, you'd look at the center front and you draw the line to what side it's pointing. So because it's kind of straddled between the two quarters here, look at the center front and be like, okay, he's at the flank. So this here is a flank charge because of where the center front is. And that's when they are between two quarters. You're just gonna have to use your common sense here. You know, that's the quarter line here. Like I said, there was no arc or angle mentioned in the rules. And when you do a flank charge, it doesn't really matter, I guess, how you've lined up your flankers, as long as that center front is touching the enemy that you've charged. The rulebook has them like this, where the center front's at the corner. Usually when I play, my center front's like just in the middle. As long as the center front is touching their flank, all is well. Alright, we're going to end it here for today. Next time we will get into charging 2-on-1. 1-on-2 charges, and we'll also look at open order charges as well as some charge responses. That'll be in part 11. Thank you guys for watching. If you like this, please subscribe, like this video, and I intend to keep making content and try to continue this channel as much as I can. So thank you all for watching. Have a good one and stay safe and healthy out there.